Thank you all for joining us. Now, there's ample evidence that as long ago as 10,000 years, people were already sliding around on cross-country type planks. And then in Sweden, they found some 3,000-year-old skis in a peat bog. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, there's a nasty lawsuit going on because Atomic is saying those are definitely Atomic skis. And Head is saying there's no way this guy was sponsored by Atomic. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the history of skiing and then discuss how ski technique and also teaching has changed. So let's fast forward 5,000 years to the 1800s. For the first time, skiing has become a sport. So the first cross-country race is held in 1843 in Norway. Ski jumping becomes huge, and ski clubs open up all over Europe, US, even in Australia. This is great, but what about the downhilling? Well, in 1880, some students come down from Oslo to study in Munich, and they bring their cross-country skis with them. And there they are, standing at the foot of these Alps and look up and go, wow, that is steep. Do you want to take the gondola or the chair? So up they go and stumble their way down, making some sort of a telemark turn, but that was the start of downhilling. Now, the first pioneer was a gentleman by the name of Matthias Sidarsky. He was an Austrian from Lilienfeld, west of Vienna, and he was around the late 1890s through to the early 1900s. I haven't enough time to tell you all his contributions. Let me quickly summarize. He invented a much better binding, a metal binding, that still allowed you to lift the heel, but he could really provide some twisting force to the ski. He invented the stem Christie with a progression from beginner to stem Christie. He wrote an instructional book. He was the first to start a ski race in 1905. And he taught upwards of 20,000 people throughout his career. So he, in many people's eyes, was the father of alpine skiing. And I'm sure you've seen the photos of him with his long stick that he would jam in the snow to help drag him around the corner. He actually skied some really steep terrain, some 50-degree type slopes back then. With that equipment is very impressive. The next person to come on the scene was a gentleman by the name of Hannes Schneider, also an Austrian from the Albergue, Lech, St. Anton-sur-Meuse. He learned to ski at a young age, so he was early 1900s, and his main work was in the 1920s and 30s. He became an instructor at the age of 17, and he did two things. He invented the famous Albergue Technique, which was a progression from snowplow to stem Christie. And this is what the Albergue Technique looked like. Let me show you. Watch carefully because the upper body movement is imperceptible. So just a slight movement here, and then around here. Ooh, that feels good. Why don't we ski like that? And the second thing he did, together with the German filmmaker Arnold Frank, he made a series of movies called Der Weiße Rausch, the White Ecstasy, depicting Hannes, skiing the powder, jumping, and frolicking around in the snow. These films were shown all over the world and really popularized the brand new sport of skiing. Now, he actually did one more thing. He was famous for doing these or giving these mass beginner lessons. 100 people all lined up and him standing out in front. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the lesson. My name is Hannes Schneider. What is your... No, forget it. First exercise is the kick turn. And around we go. That's it. Very good. Whoa, 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 whoa. All right, up you get, up you get. Now, this is my first bone of contention with the famous Horst Abraham and the PSIA. Because it is Horst and the PSIA who claim to be the first to introduce student-centered teaching to the world, when clearly they stole the idea from Hannes Schneider. I see right through you. So where are we at? Well, we need a parallel turn. And in 1930, Anton Selos invents the parallel turn. He's a ski racer, the best ski racer at the time. And ski racing was downhill and slalom. And in the slalom, Anton Selos quickly realized that this movement was not going to cut it, and it was much faster to turn the skis at the same time. So the parallel turn was invented. Now, he did get some help. In 1928, Rudolf Lettner invents the metal edge. So skiers could grip much better and could turn more easily. Unfortunately, it did bring about the dreaded die schöne Schwung, the beautiful turn. The skiing with the damn skis locked together. I've never been a fan of this, and I'm not sure if there's anything more detrimental to the learning or the developing of the skiing skills than skiing with your bloody skis together. And unfortunately, it's still on display up there on our green slopes when our instructors are showing a beautiful parallel turn, close ski position, barely a level 4 student in tow. Great picture. But anyway, we've got this parallel turn now. And what's interesting is that for the next 50 years, the ski world is in complete disagreement about how to ski. In the 30s and 40s, people said, well, we really need to use the upper body to get the skis to come around. So they're using a strong upper body rotation to get the skis to come around. You know, all right, the snow is deep, the skis are long, but there were two factors that would indicate that it was not a good idea. First, the ski racers are demonstrating through the slalom course perfect quite upper body and perfect leg rotation. So why don't we copy those? Secondly, the upper body rotation was unhealthy. It actually exacerbated this leg leg injuries. So it was actually not a good idea. But the ski world kept going with this upper body rotation, and it kept going throughout the 50s, even into the 60s, when the French very proudly said, we're not giving up the upper body rotation, we're going to keep going with that. There was one gentleman who thought it not to be a good idea, and that was Stefan Kruckenhauser. He said, you know what, it doesn't sit well with me. And he was the chief of the Austrian Ski Instructor Federation, and he gathered his buddies and said, you know, why don't we get together, have a conference, and we can ski, we can demonstrate, we can discuss, and we can really try and hash out what the best ski technique should be at the time. So that was the start of the first Interski Congress in 1951 in Zurich, The Austrians demonstrated beautiful Vail, with Beinspiel, the beautiful short turns with leg rotation, but the rest of the world stuck to the upper body rotation. Yeah. So as I said, that kept going through the 50s and 60s. And then Kochenhauser, towards the late 60s, was going to retire. But he decided not to. And unfortunately makes a huge blunder. You see, back then, grooming wasn't big yet. Incidentally, the US, the Americans invented the ski lift in 1936 in Sun Valley. They also pretty much invented the grooming machine, but it wasn't widespread. So all the slopes were covered in moguls, huge moguls. And that's why Kochenhauser said in 1971, the only technique should be this huge bend and stretch turn. We're going to do an extreme bend and stretch turn where your backside nearly touches the snow. Fine for upper levels, but unfortunately, he said, let's do it in the lower levels and in the intermediate levels as well. So that was, unfortunately, a bad mistake. And it threw the world back in turmoil. What are we going to do? What is the correct technique? And then finally, in 1979, the Interski in Tsao, Japan, the world comes to its senses and realizes, yes, we do have a correct technique at the higher levels. This is how everybody skis. The French finally came on board with the leg rotation. Kochenhauser was moved aside. Hoppichler comes along and says, no more extreme bend and stretch. And here's the technique that everybody realized. If it's somewhat smooth, groomed, and it's steep, like, say, 1876, bottom of 1876, it makes total sense to come up at the start of the turn, come up and forward, and then come down to dig in with the edges. If it's really steep, well, we'll exaggerate that and we'll do a jump turn. If it's slightly less steep, and we're moving with speed, we may not need to come up so much. We'll direct the move more into the turn as we come forward. And if we're doing short turns at high speed, we'll probably find ourselves needing to do a bit of retraction extension to absorb that pressure buildup. I like that. If it's powder, we can do a middle position turn, or at speed, we can do a bit of retraction extension. If it's really crusty and windblown, probably need to come up a little bit. If it's moguls with speed, we'll do retraction extension. And if it's racing back then in the 70s, we'll carve as much as possible and we'll step and scissor to help with the line. So this was the technique that everybody finally realized in 1970. Everybody skied the same. Now, what about the teaching? Well, back then, I guess still, the countries were fiercely proud of their own national progressions, skiing methodologies, their style, their look. The French had a distinct look. The Austrians, those are definitely the Austrians. They're the French. The Italians. Now, all these methodologies, all these progressions were fine. They all worked. The trouble was that the teaching of these progressions was terrible. And there were two people who recognized that. Our famous Horst Abraham, who incidentally was a member of the Austrian national demonstration team through the 60s. He worked under Kochenhauser. And the famous Georges Joubert from France. And Georges said, teaching is not working. I'm convinced we're not doing it well. And I'm going to run an experiment. Great. I love experiments. What's on your mind, George? Well, we're going to have two beginner groups. We're going to make two beginner groups. We're going to make sure that the makeup is pretty similar. So we'll put a science teacher in one, we'll put a science teacher in the other, we'll put a bold, short-haired person in one, a short-haired person in the other. So the groups were very similar. And then one group, we're going to pick the finest, the very best instructor from the ENSA, the French Academy. And I said to George, "Well, that's me, isn't it?" "That's definitely me." "All right, yeah, that's fine." And then the other group, we're going to have no instructor. "You're kidding. George, you've got to be joking. That can't be... there's no way this is going to work." Anyway, the experiment went ahead, and at the start of the week, the group with the instructor progressed much more quickly. And I said, that's obvious, isn't it, George? "I told you so." By the middle of the week, the group without the instructor had caught up. By the end of the week, the group without the instructor was not only much better, but they skied much more freely and naturally. And this is mind-blowing. How can that be the case? This was filmed, by the way, and then the same experiment was done with an intermediate group with the same result. And the reason becomes obvious when you look at it. The group with the instructor, I'm not about to create a comfortable learning environment because I'm the instructor, I'm the stud, I'm the boss. They're the students. I line my group up, they go one at a time. If they perform the exercise well, great. If they don't, well, it's not my fault, it's their fault. They have to line up again, they wait another 10 minutes before they have another crack at it. I explain it to them one time. I know how things should be taught. I know how they should learn. So I'm going to explain it this way, and that's it. The group without the instructor, they spent the first hour wetting themselves with laughter as they were falling all over the place. And then they got together, and they said, "Look, what's going on? Let's figure out what we have to do." So they watched and copied and observed everybody on the slopes, and then had a go at it. They tried all the movements, they experimented, they practiced all the time. They weren't standing around. And then they formed other little groups and got back together again and shared. So here, this is the absolute quintessential epitome of experiential learning, the very best learning that you can get, and the very thing that Horst Abraham has been talking about for years. He, in fact, even spoke about it in 1979 in Sao, Japan, as long ago as that, and he did a workshop on it in April last year. So my challenge to all of us, and myself, I didn't realize I was such a bad instructor, is to find out as much as we can about experiential learning. The first thing we're going to do is read that article in the latest 32 Degree magazine, but that's only the start of it. Then we're going to research it some more on the internet, and then as a final word, to become a great instructor, you really need to understand the meaning of learning. And the definition of learning is to become aware of the change. Now, that means that there's only one person who can become aware of that change, and that's the learner or the student. We, as instructors, are going to do our level best to help the student develop that awareness. And if we can do that, we'll become great instructors. Thank you very much, everybody.